Priyank. Welcome to this episode of Vaartaalaap. Good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Avan. Thanks for inviting me and looking forward for the discussion today.
Sure. So, for our viewers, Priyank has over 15 years of work experience. He's the founder and CEO of Innovation Roots and Agile Network. He's currently based out of Bengaluru. Anything that you wish to add to your profile? You still do multifarious things, I believe, apart from this.
That's fine, actually, Avan. I do multiple things, and these are the two primary things which is I'm doing right now.
Okay, cool.
So,
So, for our viewers, can you probably list out a little bit of detail as to where did your agile journey start? Probably it's been 15 years long and more, I guess.
yeah. So interestingly, I love helping people and love seeing them successful in their journey, and
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of something which is very, you can say, satisfying feeling to me.
Mm-hmm.
So my journey to consulting, or you can say mentoring, started when I had this realization.
Mm-hmm.
But as in job, as people ask me the same question, I started my job approximately, as you correctly said, 15 years before,
Mm-hmm.
and I started getting inquiries because of my nature of you know
Mm-hmm.
work, as well as my overall personal way to the solutioning. People started coming to me, and I become more like an internal consultant earlier,
Okay.
and then later I started becoming recognized across my company,
Mm-hmm.
and they started putting me for consulting related work within the company.
Mm-hmm.
And later in the years, I got a job which was purely into consulting in a leading company,
Okay.
and then this journey continued for last 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I led three companies before I started
Mm-hmm.
Innovation Roots, which is a premium company into consulting services.
Okay. So, can you
So it's kind of,
detail out a little
yeah,
bit on what Innovation Roots is and what is Agile Network?
yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, so both are close to my heart, and both are incepted by me.
Mm-hmm.
Innovation Root is a premium consulting services company,
Mm-hmm.
and it started from my dining table and where it is today.
Mm-hmm.
It's a company having multiple global clients where we provide them consulting services
Mm-hmm.
based on our model called PI consulting model, and it's primarily partnering, assessing, and educating and execution. So, as I said like earlier, I have a passion for helping others, and I realized that we don't just need to give some gyan to the customer and run away. And there has to be a consulting company which has to be conceptualized, which really is interested in execution part also. So
Mm-hmm.
we conceptualize this on my dining table. I mean, obviously, at that point of time, there was no employee. So my
Mm-hmm.
family was the, you can say, advisor to me, and
Mm-hmm.
they helped me to give this a company a shape initially in thinking process, and then later today what it is a consulting company having operations not just in India but also in some other countries as
Mm-hmm.
consulting services assignments goes, just like that in different
Mm-hmm.
countries.
Mm-hmm.
We have locally consultants working in various cities in India,
Mm-hmm.
whereas our operation office is based out at Bangalore. So
Okay.
we have consulting assignments going on in Jaipur, Gurgaon, Hyderabad,
Mm-hmm.
Pune,
Mm-hmm.
and Bangalore
Mm-hmm.
primarily. And our consulting is a, you can say, is a broader umbrella of services. But then we are very deep into transformation consulting services,
Mm-hmm.
agile consulting services,
Mm-hmm.
services related to product management,
Mm-hmm.
Scrum, Kanban, and design thinking, etc.
Okay.
So these are like the spectrum of the services where we
Mm-hmm.
are very deeply rooted into the solutioning part of it, where we have
Mm-hmm.
innovated our own way of, consulting, assessment,
Mm-hmm.
training, for example, and mentoring people and enabling them so that there
Mm-hmm.
is a direct value, tangible value, which is really in number is demonstrated on paper to the client. So that's the kind of company Innovation Route is, and having clients like G in past and MasterCard, for example, and companies like Clifford Chance, And so we have a broader range of clients which are from different domains. And at the other hand, obviously, Innovation Route is a separate entity, and Agile Network India is a community. And as any community runs, it has its own independent operation. And that community is incepted obviously in my mind in 2005ish or 6 years time in last decade. And then it was kind of what I call for ANI was a gray age, and it was in a stealth mode, I would say. Mostly we were trying, I was trying, and a couple of people with me were trying to do something about it. And then if I'm not wrong, 2014-15, we started doing meetups in different cities. And 2016, we launched our first flagship conference, which is called agilegurugram.com conference. And then we have our chapters now in various cities in India, and they collaborate. So it's basically a platform where people come, share their knowledge, and at the other side, people come and acquire that knowledge. So they're like people who are industry experts and people who have real-time experience. And at the other side, people those are from industry. And so primarily they share the knowledge. And that's the kind of a concept on which we started this community with. And make it a world-class platform was the motto, or you can say the mission behind the creation of that. So it runs conferences, it runs meetup, it has webinars, and various other things which primarily you can categorize into events as a category, but also it has forums, and it has a job forum also very recently launched. And so it enables the practitioner across industry, across India, to exchange the information as well as knowledge, skills, and now jobs as well, which was not my favorite, but then people really need it, right, in the COVID time. So we changed our way of thinking, and then we adapted to accommodate that request as well. So that's the pretty much about both the entities. And ANI, if I say, having 12 active chapters across India. Just to name a few, we have Jaipur, we have Gurugram, Chandigarh, we have Noida, which is a separate chapter, and Delhi also is a separate chapter. Then we have Vadodara, Bombay, and Mumbai basically, and Pune, and Hyderabad, Kolkata. We have chapter in Bangalore, Chennai. These are like super active chapters, and they are primarily run by volunteers. So there are volunteers from different companies, and they come forward to create learning opportunities for others and themselves, and that's how the exchange of the forum has been built. And that idea is like obviously scalable, so it's going to new cities as well. Like for example, yesterday I was talking to a lady from Bikaner, and to my surprise, there are 3-4 big companies in Bikaner. Nobody knows that, right? So our network actually reaches to the places where we cannot as physical humans. So there are companies which have good hundreds of employees, and in different industries. We have IT industry as well there. And she was keen to start something like what we call as chapter in our community over there as well. So people are approaching, and we are also approaching people to facilitate the learning. So it's like a 2-dimensional journey, and it's rapidly growing. And we're very happy that it has reached here. I learned a lot from there.
Okay, I mean, one of the great things that you talked about was finding your passion through helping others. Not a lot of people actually do that, but you have found your passion through your entities. That's a great part of it, and I think it's a great spirit to work for people with you as well, where you are trying to solve problems, you're trying to help people, and that kind of brings out the best of a person as well as from an entity perspective too. So getting into the agile side of things, agile adoption has been there for many years now. So there have been various flavors of agile. There has been extreme programming. There is scrum out there. People talk about scaled agile, safe, less now. How do you see that adoption currently in India, just from a industry perspective?
See, India is a large country, Aman. I can't, comment about the whole country. I can only comment about my experience with
Sure.
where I have seen it working.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are companies across India, and in every city, they are using some or other form of agile.
Mm-hmm.
And there are very number of reports which are, I call it virtual reality reports,
Mm-hmm.
available on internet, and they give you some idea about what is going on. But I have first-hand experience through ANI because I have been to the cities myself, like, for example, Chandigarh, Jaipur, Kolkata, Vadodara. Wherever the chapters are, I have at least visited them, and I have interacted with people, and I know that they are doing a great, adoption. And as I say, adoption, they might not be at the very maturity top level over there, but then they might not be on the top level over there, but they may be in a great shape of doing something with agile, some or other format of. So I have seen people. I don't have read about it. I have seen people across India using agile, and that's the briefest possible answer. And there are hundreds of companies, for example, in Vadodara and Jaipur and Chandigarh, which are tier 2 cities, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to understand the adoption, most of the people generally go and inquire about a large scale MNC in Bangalore, which is a Silicon Valley of India, or maybe they will go to Pune, Hyderabad, or Gurugram, which are the top hubs of IT. But when you look at the reality, there are small and there are medium and large scale companies across India, not just in these large cities. And like, for example, Vizag, right, and Goa. I mean, these are like, who knows that there are companies there. I didn't had any idea until I had created the ANI. So I learned that there are so many companies across India are using, various form of agile. And as being a proponent of agile, I feel happy about it because they're getting benefited as well. And there are various flavors, as you correctly said. So some of those are using very deep form of Kanban, maybe, or maybe Scrum, or maybe some or other form of agile in a way, or some other scaling frameworks as well. So it depends the nature of that company and the domain they are into. Like financials are typically large scale companies, so they pick up a framework which is easy to adapt. Whereas there are companies which are more emerged from a startup to a large scale company now. They might have an original agile, or you can say the purest format of agile, where they don't have those frameworks in place, but the excellent practices in place where you can see a mature agile adoption, or you can say implementation in place.
Okay. So, in terms of seeing the utility of Agile beyond information technology companies, because if you talk about project management methodologies, PMI philosophy, the core project management is pervasive across a lot of industries, not just information technology. But Agile kind of gets limited in the information technology world. How have you seen the adoption when you talk about Agile in non-information technology industries?
I think so. I'm very unaware about PMI,
Okay.
what they have done, and I'm aware about Agile as a proponent of Agile. You can understand.
Sure, sure.
So I recently, in last 3 years to 5 years, I can tell you about my journey. I worked for a circuit breaker company. Circuit breakers are not IT for sure.
Yeah.
Circuit breakers are literally a manufacturing plant and an R&D division where they are actually researching how we can actually create the next generation circuit breakers, cutting edge technology, and etc. So there are companies like that, and then I have seen myself, working for a companies like which are into transportation department or domain, what we call like aircraft and
Maintenance, aircraft maintenance.
locomotives
Okay.
manufacturing companies, right? They are using a lot of agile and different frameworks in there. I am recently working for a company which is into high tech, and they manufacture electronics. And just before that, I worked for a company which is making bearing, the bearing which is basically used in the automobile, right?
Yeah.
So there are so many other companies which are also using it. I believe at the same time the industry size is too big, the sample of the data is too small to share. So if you compare it with any earlier, similar methodology, or not necessarily similar, but a reference methodology or way of thinking, I believe Agile has a lot to be done yet in terms of when I say going beyond IT, but it is largely adopted now in various industries as well. That's my view about it. And
Okay.
I can't comment about whether the railways is using it, but
Yeah.
I believe one fine day they will see the utilization or benefit of it. But aviation is using it a lot, and many other domains. Healthcare is one of the biggest proponent of Agile. So you take a name like Philips or GE Healthcare or anyone like that, right? They all are doing, and there may be a lot of case studies which are public out there you can refer to. And I have myself worked for companies in healthcare, and as a company, we have worked for multiple healthcare companies, and
Okay.
they do amazing agile in terms of when I say it becomes a reference for others to,
Yeah.
where there's a complex domain and you can't really imagine beyond that manufacturing style of doing things. And you have a new reference now, and then okay, so this is how healthcare has done it. So why not you can try it? And there are a lot of regulations and a lot of governance in there in healthcare. So they always have the question in manufacturing and other industry, like, we have governance, we have policies, we have this restriction, and this is the constraint. So
Right.
you can refer, and then that's the bridge, in my personal opinion. If you refer to these industries, you have an option to adapt in any industry. So it's for
So
everyone in precise
okay.
terms. Yeah.
Okay. So some of the things around agile are there are certain obstacles when you go out to companies and you want to implement an agile philosophy. There are certain obstacles, and one of the obstacles is, as you rightly said, it's not just for IT, it's for other branches and other sectors as well. But what I have seen in my personal opinion is that people want to follow rituals, but agile is more than that. It's a mindset. What are the kind of obstacles you have seen when you have gone around, be it in terms of an agile transformation or an agile implementation, that you have encountered while implementing?
See, there are many actually, Aman. Okay. And there are lots of research done on that domain, and my experience around that, and so one of the biggest challenge I have seen is, obviously, as you have already highlighted, the question has the answer, mindset. But
Mm-hmm.
then I'm not going to talk about mindset today, as everyone talks about it. So I'll tell you about
Mm-hmm.
the other problems, which are
Sure.
also very common and, very much seen in the industry.
Sure.
One of the things is people always have a process,
Mm-hmm.
be it anything,
Mm-hmm.
and they just want to improve, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And they try to retrofit this thing in there, and that's also a mindset example though. But then it's just like, you have a problem, you want a solution, and you look forward for this without knowing what has to be done, and that's like a wrong start, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
And they generally go for a wrong start, and it creates no value for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they struggle to identify where the solution lies.
Mm-hmm.
Is this just a fad, or is there a real solution there? And then they search on internet and they find some classical references, and they fall into the trap of, the certifications, or maybe the wrong people out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just think that hiring a, consultant can solve every problem they have in the company,
Yeah.
or else just getting some people trained or certified can solve all the problems of the
Mm-hmm.
company. But that these are the typical problems I have evidently seen. Like, I gone to a company, they have a wrong start, they had a consultant, or they have done some part of it, partially done it, or maybe have fully done it.
Yeah.
But then they eventually landed up in a shape where they are very reluctant to do something further.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the biggest challenge, in my personal opinion. Other being the cultural challenges, like, if
Mm-hmm.
even if you take India, and like, it's a big country, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have been to Chennai once, and
Mm-hmm.
I lived there for approximately a couple of months. And when I was going there, the bias, like, the thinking bias is like, oh, people are different there,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and they're not actually. They're very, very cool people, actually. You love
Yeah.
working with people over there. They're very flat, they're straight. So they don't
Mm-hmm.
like something, they tell you on face. That's the kind of people I encountered, most of those people. I cannot again generalize the thing because I have
Yeah.
encountered hardly a bunch of people.
Yeah.
So I've been there, and then I learned that the cultural difference is a barrier also within the country also. In fact, we talk about like cultural barriers beyond the country to communicate what we are trying to achieve as a company or maybe as a goal. So giving that clarity about business aspirations, what we call as the business values and the business goals, and that's the agile comes in the picture, is a very difficult task. You have a developer there who doesn't have the same understanding about the subject as you have, and then it's not just a solution can be done in a classroom training program. It's very difficult to communicate that thing to that person because he thinks or his configuration or her configuration is a little different way culturally, and the perspective and the way they think is a little different. So it creates challenge. And as I have exposure to almost a lot of culture in India, like Calcutta or maybe the people over there will be thinking a little differently about the same problem, and as well as in people in Chandigarh would be or maybe Delhi would be thinking. So everyone is different here, and we have to appreciate that piece that they think differently. But the same thing can be positioned the same way, but maybe not conceived the same way. What I'm trying to explain is this piece, right? So you say the same thing, the idea is same, but not conceived the same way. And that is a cultural challenge. So cultural challenge followed by the mindset is a bigger, and then the last is like, as I have already highlighted a piece of it, but incorrect understanding about the subject is the biggest last challenge. And you know what I'm talking about. Like a lot of people run behind the frameworks and things which are not even proven in the market yet, and they just, because they're fancy, they just like they just want to put a sticker on their on their wall. They just run behind those things, and then eventually it end up with no value. So these are the kind of challenges I have seen, Aman, in my in a briefest possible way. I can tell you there's a huge list of things otherwise to share.
One thing which I remember very fondly was that while being part of Agile implementations, one of the things that came to the fore was that if you had a supplier and teams being virtual, the idea was that your supplier team is agile and they are working in an agile mode, so you are also agile. And that kind of did not create any value creation because you were following, a team was following, a sub team was following rituals, but you were possibly gaining something out of it, but not, you were not essentially in an agile way, you were not set up in an agile way. So people have been trying up to overcome these problems. There have been cases where I heard even robots were brought in to be seated as virtual members at certain office spaces so that they can replicate a offshore team, and that way you can try to make it agile. I don't know how far they have been successful, but that's one use case which I personally feel is a very strong one, where there has to be some solution in either in terms of scaled agile or something else.
I think this is too crazy. What you just said is to implementing it that way. And look at the conditions today, right? I mean, like, I'll give you very simple thinking, right? Agile is out now. It's not of any, there is no nobleness in that now. Basically, if you look at from the framework angle, right? So you have the framework. Framework means templatization of the thing, right? The ideology is when it is too much templatized, and then you have restrictions to think. Then you're not actually thinking out of the box. You're thinking within the box. That's the problem. Agile was always introduced initially when that was introduced, and people like me got sold out on the idea. It was about innovation. It was about how you collaborate better. You find out the new ways of thinking and solutions, right? And not necessarily putting up economical investments like that, what you just explained, right? So applying the right idea, or the right solution is very critical. So idea can be anything, but the solution is very critical. So how do you reach to a solution is all about agile, not about if you have heard about something fancy done by a large scale company and you replicate it, is not the definition of agile at all, right? So you have your own scenario as a company, and you have your own problems, you have your own constraints, you have your own challenges, and you can refer to a big company, and maybe there are some good stuff they have done, but you can't really retrofit it into your company. You have to devise your own agility, in my personal opinion. And it was never been rituals. It was never been about frameworks to me personally. And that becomes a reference because you want a faster start, but then it's not the purpose. It's not the goal at the end that you tick mark everything and you're already agile. Most of the companies which you see and you have already highlighted fail because of that wrong approach. And that's the whole point I told you, that they have a wrong start.
Yeah.
And then that's the problem. So
Yeah.
thinking wisely is critical.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is, in my opinion, is still is an abstract idea. We are still exploring. We are
Yeah.
still identifying the ways out, right?
Yeah.
So when I meet a new company, I might be meeting a company in Calcutta which is into ERP business, okay,
Yeah.
and one of the leading company in India,
Yeah.
and maybe most of the Indian retails and others, big giants are taking services from them,
Mm-hmm.
but they are not agile.
Yeah.
Why they are not? Because they don't need it, maybe because they don't have that challenge seen yet.
Yeah.
So their business goal is not to go and expand themselves, and they're not in they're in a context where they are very happy with what they are doing. All what they can achieve is better ways of working using agile, or maybe they can think about how they can be more productive, or maybe they can be more employee friendly, maybe how their employee happiness index can go higher from those monotonous day-to-day routines. They can use then agile in that case.
Yeah. Okay.
So the journey's beginning is critical, Aman, as we all know, and maybe you might have experienced as well. I personally experience it all the time, that it is very critical that how do you start, and then how do you solve it is always is a thinking process.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
it from my end for that question. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So one thing that I also wanted to check with you was Agile has also impacted the naming convention of job roles and the job roles too. So there are certain things which come from a Scrum philosophy, like having a product owner, a Scrum master. There are release managers through, or at times even sprint managers. There have been other evolutions too, like people talking about technical producers. Now, within an agile context, how do you feel is this evolution of job roles that happens through an agile philosophy, an implementation of an agile philosophy?
I believe Scrum is one of the most popular agile framework,
Yeah.
and it has infused and popularized these roles, and they
Hmm.
have a meaning behind them.
Yeah.
So if you look at the team, like in my company, we don't do Scrum as the book
Hmm.
suggests, the Scrum guide suggests, but we have adapted what makes sense to us.
Hmm.
So as a small company of, let's say, three people,
Hmm.
if I say there is a group of three people,
Yeah.
I may not need a Scrum master, because if they are not by themselves agile,
Hmm.
and there is a lot of transaction, right? Just like this conversation is completely a transactional conversations. I will end up my talk, and then you will talk, and then you will do your work maybe, and I'll do my work.
Sure.
Imagine we have third person, and that's just a three of us doing some work in a
Hmm.
project, right?
Hmm.
So we don't need external interventions to influence our agility. We
Yeah.
have to be agile,
Yeah.
and that's an innate need of agile in a small setup. So
Yeah.
the most agile setups are the smallest possible one, if you
Hmm.
see the organic theory behind that.
Yeah.
So for a company, I can tell you about our company's journey as innovation route. We have identified people; those will be Scrum Masters, product owner.
Hmm.
Eventually, the product owners, if they lack the knowledge about the product, which is what we call as portfolio, or maybe the solutions which we are building, or the website which we are building,
Hmm.
or the market knowledge, and they are stuck, then there is a problem as well, right? So the
Yeah.
agility as a concept is about how do you enable your teams as a
Hmm.
product owner to be efficient, to be
Hmm.
more productive, to be
Yeah.
effective in the context, right? So
Hmm.
just having a role doesn't solve the problem sometimes.
Yeah.
Having a competent person doing that role solves the problem. So, and
Sure.
again, in search of competencies, people go for education, and
Hmm.
then they end up with getting a certification. So that's just another feather on their hat. And now I am changed, for example, having a very limited knowledge, but it happens gradually
Hmm.
over the period of time. Like you might have seen project managers working in the industry for long now, and that
Yeah.
domain has gained the maturity.
Hmm.
Scrum Master, domain has gained the maturity as well. Product owner domain has gained the maturity, what that role is. But as a product owner, the biggest challenge to them is knowing the performance of the product in the market.
Yeah.
And that's an unknown territory. You cannot predict everything upfront, right?
Sure.
Once you introduce a feature, then only you get to know what is going to happen and then what is to be done next. Likewise, the other person, in my personal view, Scrum Masters are more exposed to people.
Yeah.
And again, humans are unpredictable domain again, right?
Yeah.
You don't know what the person is thinking. So
Sure.
these two are very challenging role, at the same time, very, very effective role in Scrum, if I talk about Scrum.
Yeah.
So adoption of these roles are very widely popular. You go to a company, you will find these two people.
Sure.
But if you look at the current situation created because of COVID pandemic, you will feel like, people are self-equipped, right? So self-organizing nature, which is the trait, which was a Scrum Master was responsible to induct into a team or a person, is the biggest demand. So the weightage of that thing has been on the top, in the chart ever. Whereas, so these roles fade as the team gain maturity. I am saying Scrum Master is I believe personally is very important. At the same time, the current COVID situation where you don't have the team, maybe you just can't facilitate everything, and the person has to be on the top of the problem as a self-managed person.
Right.
So at the other side, the product owners still have its own weightage.
Sure.
So all these roles are being introduced with a purpose behind the scene. The problem has to be solved with this role. And the problem, if you can solve with other techniques as well, and you don't restrict your thinking, and you can be successful with that. Just I just given you an example, so for example, in our team, it was not making sense to us to have a Scrum Master and a product owner, whereas we equipped everyone to do everything. So I have a developer in my team today. She knows about what is to be done in the website, which is a production website. And then she knows how the operation runs. So she managing the operation. And then she goes and introduces a page to the website, and it is on live website directly. So she is, maybe you can call it another fancy name given as DevOps engineer, but that's not the truth. She is basically knowing what is the essential practice of making this successful at her own. So she might need to acquire knowledge about designing, because her original skill set was HTML and CSS, but then she acquired the knowledge about how to do Adobe related work. And then she learned about how to launch it using maybe a release tool or maybe a production website, how it is managed on the server. And then if you give the exposure to people in a small company, it is generally a very straightforward flow, right? How do we originate the value? The value stream is straightforward. So we see this exposure is given to these people, and then their performance is absolutely different as compared to if I compare it with a client where they don't have that exposure with the people. So they have the jobs and they have the boundaries and the restrictions and the roles and the policies and all that stuff. So all these roles emerge based on the need, Amaya. It is about what do you need and the need of the hour, right? You need a release manager, you create a release manager role basically, and that person is responsible, And if you need maybe a person who is a production engineer, then you create a role of a production engineer. However, that task, if you consider it as a production management as a task, has to be done by the release manager. You transfer that to that. And that's how the companies have created all these roles. There's a classic say about these roles. In system thinking, if you have to introduce a new role, or you need to introduce a new change, you always introduce with a new name. So you always introduce something with a new name. There was a manager, you wanted to change in that. The way the thinking is happening behind the scene, the purpose of the role was a little different. Whereas you introduce now the Scrum Master, who is a new role introduced into the team. And then, and obviously not new anymore, but that 25, 30-year-old role now. But then this new role has a very different perspective about things and have different responsibilities. And he's the coach for the team. So what does a coach does is not the same as the manager does. So you wanted that change, and the transition was very effective if you introduce, rather than that person having new task in the task list versus you introduce a complete new role. That's my way of thinking when I look at these new roles. But these are all essential in different cases, but some of those are just waste of effort, and just to map with a fancy framework, and that doesn't really make sense to me personally.
Yeah, I mean, since you hit on roles, one of the things that I used to see earlier was an agile project manager role. Whereas we know that there is nothing called as a project manager in Agile, and I used to contest and ask people around me while I was working in companies like Eridas and Ford, what does the Agile project manager do when you have a role called Scrum Master? And I think at that point of time they were trying to transition a common project manager, which was a very static role in those companies, into an agile format, something which was just being transitioned without thinking whether there was a need for a role like that or not. So that has potentially matured now. I don't see those advertisements anymore. I see roles like product owner, product manager, and scrum masters rather than agile project managers now. So possibly we have seen some maturity in that respect.
Maybe I can just add one line in that. So when we say there is nothing called agile project manager in Agile, I don't think that there is a guidebook for Agile. It's just
Sure.
like about, there's nothing like a book where you can refer to it, right? The only book, or you can say the reference to me as a practitioner, is the Agile Manifesto.
Yes.
And there it doesn't really defines this term, and that's, if you want that term, that also doesn't defines the term called Scrum Master. So Scrum Master comes from Scrum, not from
Sure.
Agile Manifesto.
Yes. True.
So having said that, I think these are all evolutions. If you see in the industry and widely adopted things, like, I have also seen this thing happening, like, agile project manager or project lead, and then eventually you got on a scrum master, and then over the time they become like very much overlapping things.
Yeah.
So this guy goes off and this guy stays.
Yeah.
And as you correctly said, the industry today have, if you refer to the Gartner or any big data resource, widely adopted the concepts of Scrum and Kanban.
Yeah.
And the roles which are recommended in Scrum is just two. And in fact, there is a team which is doing development.
Yeah.
So this is the simplest way to get started. All these fancy things like release manager or a release train engineer and all that stuff is not necessarily in some cases, but for a large scale company you need a lot of managerial role and leadership role. So then you
Sure.
might map them with that basically.
Sure.
That's how it works. Yeah.
Yeah. So one last question, Priyank. We live in a technology world. We talk about AI, robotics, machine learning, blockchain, so on and so forth. How do you see Agile fitting in with these technologies in probably a decade or so from now? What would be the evolution where an Agile can go hand in hand with these technologies in terms of transformations or maybe just pure implementations?
I believe um almost everyone in the current circumstances need rethinking. So if the rethinking as a word has to be used, it goes handy with agile, right? You are not being rigid and you are trying to do something better. So in my personal view, you can ask me this question: which industry should use agile? I will say everyone should.
Yeah.
Which format they should devise? What will happen next 10 years, God only knows. I'm not a astrologer. I can only tell you what I have as in my pipe. At least for this end of the year until next March, I can give you a very high level prediction that the companies which are really agile have already repurposed themselves.
Okay.
And that's the right English term I use. Like, for example, Innovation Route used to do a lot of events which were offline. Okay. And a proponent of agile, we were like always interested in a learning experience, an enriching learning experience to be created when I talk about training of our company.
Yeah.
So we wanted the person to come, don't just listen and go. We wanted that person to come, experience it, learn a lot, and then go back and implement it. And that's the success for us. But we repurposed it because of this necessity, and then this constraint has created challenges for us. So we created a lot of simulations. Now we are on the way to launch new games which are virtually done, but then again creating the similar or maybe better level of experience and engagement for the people. At the other end, when we say conferences which we used to do, so we have, like for example, in last 6 months, since this pandemic has impacted all of us since March primarily, we have launched 2 online summits. One of that was Agile Summit, the other one is Scrum Summit, and we transitioned ourselves. Obviously, the biggest hurdle for us also was thinking whether it will be possible or not, because we haven't done it. We are been into the domain for last 6-7 years. We have done absolutely amazing conferences like Lean Kanban India for last 6-7 years since 2015. Whereas we have people coming and learning and sharing knowledge and all that stuff, and we have ANI at the other end where we have lots of people doing sharing all across India. We were not very ready for this thought that whether we should go online and do a conference online or summit online or something like that. But now when we have seen the change is the necessary thing and we don't have options left, we moved. And we repurposed ourselves as a company, and we are trying to create further improvements in that, how we can actually address that need and position ourselves. So for every industry, be it any industry, Agile can be a very good help to them to repurpose and iterate, in my personal opinion, iterate into smaller chunk, and then involve the stakeholders which are not just their team but the people beyond their team, and then can what we call in lean startup is pivot and then throw what is not of use and then just go ahead. So if they stay with the old model, they cannot survive basically. I mean, one of the example could be the share taxi domain, right? I have seen people struggling very badly there, whereas I have seen people struggling in the very popular interior designing industry, right? Whereas when I spoken to some of the entrepreneurs like that, I said like, why you're staying or sticking back with this whole thing? So your old knowledge or your old expertise or the the level you have reached is actually creating a problem to you to rethink, right? That's exactly the industry should not do. They should forget about all that. And when the time will come, their knowledge will not go for waste. Their brand and all that stuff will again regain the popularity. But now the time is about innovation. The time is about how do you go and address the need of the hour, right? So if you see the companies which are doing great in this pandemic, and there are a lot, right? They're not just few. Just you can't really count them on fingers. A huge number of companies doing amazing. Like in supply chain, some companies are doing great. So they repurposed completely themselves to the new norm, and then they say like, okay, we need to cater, and the business model for 1 year, if it is changing, is also huge, and you need to change yourself. So we change ourselves, and we learned this that we need to move online, and we redesigned most of the things which we had, and that is the same thing. I'm not saying that go online, but I'm saying rethink what makes sense to the people in the current circumstances, because the constraints are changed, the circumstances are changed, right? So a great thing is when we are going online, the market, which was like, if I say Lean Kanban India is an India level conference primarily focused to address the Indian territory, and then talking about coverage of India, and done in Bangalore. So at the very end, it is a Bangalore based conference, right? People from Bangalore will be more there as compared to anywhere, right? Whereas now when we are going online with things like that as a conference, we we got the whole world to attract now, and a large number of new markets have been opened to us, and which is amazing as an opportunity to us, right? So looking at the industry projections, in my opinion, I have seen recently some of the most complex domains, as I said, just like bearing industry, moving factories, where I have been literally is factories, and where the manufacture things are moving to agile, and we have done talks with government agencies also, where obviously we are not successful yet with them, but then there is a large interest in them as well. like those are maybe into disaster management, water conservation and water departments, which have invited us to understand how we can add value to them basically, and what kind of challenges they are having. And sometimes they are not having even known challenges, so we can actually recommend them what can be doable and what is the possibility.
Right.
So I use or you can say I leverage Agile as a thinking tool, and everyone can use it as a thinking tool, and it is for all the industry, so everyone will be benefited at the end.
Okay, great. It's been a great conversation, Priyank. It was a pleasure understanding your
So there is
perspective
a
on to.
huge market and possibility for Agile.
Sure. I mean, I also believe in agile philosophy, be it any flavor, be it Scrum or extreme programming or other things. But what works best for a company, as you rightly said, they need to think, they need to understand their problems before they get into the mode of agile implementation. They cannot retrofit. So, as you rightly stated, I think it requires a lot of evaluation, and you are doing a great work. I'm sure you will be taking up more agile transformation and other kind of transformations in future, and maybe we'll touch base again sometime in future. Thanks for your time today. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Aman. It was great talking to you as well. Thank you. Have a
Great.
great day
Have a
ahead.
have have a good day and a great week. Bye.
Bye bye.